Well, I was presented in tangible form this week with a couple of examples of the nasty fact that I am not in control of the world. The first came in the form of travel with a few friends that I see here in the church today. We were on the coming of age trip in Boston with our advisors and 14 and 15-year-olds in our church. Travel, as it often does, reminds you that you don't get to dictate the terms. We'd spent a week traveling and hiking around the city of Boston and Concord, learning our history of our faith and immersing ourselves in those environments, and had planned on a late night flight home on purpose so that we could make the most of our last day. We flew the hours to get to Dallas, avoiding the storms that had been here, and landed at DFW as a group at 9:30 at night, tired and ready to lay down in our own beds. And then the pilot came on the speaker and told us that we would be sitting there for at least 2 hours, he said. We started looking around and asking ourselves, 2 hours? This guy's funny. This is a good joke. And it wasn't. And so we looked around and we waited, and 3 hours later, at 12:30 in the morning, the gate opened, and our tired, bedraggled group of spiritual pilgrims got to the baggage claim, and an hour later, when our bags came out, we each wearily picked them up, made our way home. I got out of the car at my house about 2 in the morning, ready to survey the damage that I was worried would be at my house because of the storms. When I got there, we'd been lucky. Power was out like most people, but no real damage, and my neighbors had come and cleaned up every limb and tree that had fallen in my yard, cut them, sawed them, put them exactly in place. Things were perfect when I got there without mentioning a thing. It was grace. But this week was a very clear reminder, both in being trapped in a metal tube with human beings for longer than you want to be, and watching the ferocious power of the natural world, that I just don't get to dictate the world by my will alone. It was interesting to watch the reactions, to watch the human condition at play when a group of people are told they're going to sit in their place for 3 more hours, thank you very much, and we'll tell you when you can eat and go to the bathroom. It was interesting to watch the human condition play out in the city of Dallas this week, where none of us had control over whether we had power in the house or not, or when things would resolve. It was interesting to watch, trying to tell a toddler that we would not be watching Daniel Tiger for at least a few more days. How we react to forces beyond our control says a lot about what we believe a human to be, and where the good lies in the world. Whether the good is in me getting what I want or somewhere else. In the West, we are steeped in a myth of an individual human person versus the world. Almost every story we have of social change or justice, of heroes, begins with one courageous individual taking on the mountain and winning, or fighting the whale and defeating it, fighting the mob, or being the one lone individual who seems to get the moral conviction to speak with authority and finally change things. But our primary narrative that I learned, was that the good comes in a fight. And the fight's usually me versus almost everything else. The earth, other humans, my own desires, but it's a fight. And that myth is so ingrained in us. Liberal religion can kind of reinforce it a little bit. My guess is that most of us who are here did not come to a church like this one so that we could be transformed by the will of God outside ourselves. My guess. You might be changed and humbled and transformed here, but one of the primary reasons that people come to a place like this is to be ourselves. And that's a good thing. In a world that would tell you not to, or that the body that you were born into or who you love is a crime or a sin, being yourself and being loved for it is an amazing and holy thing. And yet, there's a version of liberal religion that says the highest good is when you leave me alone. There's not a lot of transformation in that place. So how we respond to forces beyond our control, or the idea that something may change me, or I might have to be changed, or that I cannot control the power or the plane or the storm. How we respond to that changes where we find the good in our lives, and God, and compassion, and peace. There's just so much you can't do a lot about. Death, illness, aging, whether someone will love you back, whether you will be forgiven, whether someone or something will give you grace. Most of the really big, important things have elements far beyond any of our willpower alone. Sometimes when we meet those, we react in unhealthy ways against one another, finding our power and control where we can find it. This shows up, in my experience, often in trying to dominate others or trying to disappear ourselves. If I can't control the world, I can control you. Thank you very much. And I'll try my best. Think of how many people you've seen screaming at the person who gives you your boarding pass at the airport just because a plane's late, as if that is going to make a plane in a different state fly differently, or a storm go away. Imagine how many despicable phone calls people who worked for Encore must have gotten this week. How many angry voices saying, "This is unacceptable. How could this happen to me? And now I will take it out on you until I get what I want." It shows up in acts of moral disagreement as well in our relationships with one another, in times where we believe that we cannot disagree with one another without it being a moral problem. It happens in churches and denominations and families and cities and countries where we say, if I don't get my way and you disagree with me, you must have a moral problem with you. It happens when we say, I will be in real relationship with you just after you start getting things right and agreeing with me, or at least if that part of you disappears. It's orthodoxy and purity tests. It's the inability to believe that good can rest outside of my desire. Dominance is wanting other people to disappear. But in the midst of things I can't control, one thing I'm more familiar with, I think, is me disappearing. I want you and I to get along really badly. And so often in the midst of that conflict, I will just step back, silence my voice, and not speak with authority or conviction because I'm afraid that the relationship cannot exist in grace beyond our disagreement. That's one I'm a little bit more familiar with. But either of those, neither are going to save us. In the face of death and illness and real difference and disagreement, in the face of problems bigger than any of our control at all, those things might masquerade as virtue, but they're not always. It looks like I'm the one with conviction, the only one who gets it around here, speaking up my voice against you all. And that feels like virtue. Or it can look like me being the most humble person in the whole room, stepping back quietly, avoiding the fray, because I'm a good person. But really, I'm just disappearing. Can we, like the two readings this morning said, speak with conviction about things that matter and love each other beyond difference? When the end of our lives come, lay down ourselves like leaves to the ground. I think one person in my experience who did this really well was Henry David Thoreau, and this week we visited his grave. One of my favorite pilgrimage sites, this titan of our history whose gravestone's about this big, this cranky social justice advocate hermit whose headstone just says Henry, with the pencils laid at his grave. Now, if those of you who know Thoreau at all probably know the side of him that's willing to speak with conviction and not the side that is humbled. You probably are aware of this upstart 20-something who leaves his society to go live in a cabin he built with his own hands, thank you very much, who says way before Abby Hoffman ever did that you should never trust anybody over 30, who says that his elders have absolutely nothing to teach him, at least in the first chapters of the book. But he was a person who knew that you could be holy and humbled at the same time. Halfway through his trip to Walden, he went to Mount Katahdin in Maine because he wanted to go to the wildest place he could possibly go to, a place he believed had been untouched by human encounter. So he hired a native guide to take him who knew the area, and they went up the mountain only to find that when he got to the highest place he had ever been, the most remote, wildest place he could imagine, there was graffiti and litter on the rocks. Broken beer bottles, he complained about, in 1840s. When he got up to the top, he was staring down at the wildest scene he had ever seen, and he said that he couldn't tell the difference between bears and boulders moving beneath him, but he knew that both would kill him. And in his mind, the gentle Mother Nature God that he knew at the shores of Walden Pond suddenly disappeared, and someone more fierce showed up in her place. And he wrote in her journal that she said to him, "Why did you come up here when I didn't call you? And now complain that I'm not your genial mother? If you pray for anything up here, you should pray to escape, because it's dangerous, and this air was not made for your breathing, and this soil was not made for your feet. And I am old and powerful, and I can destroy you, and I will, and one day I'll be here, and you won't." And so he scampered back down the mountain, back down to the gentle shores of the pond, humbled forever by the idea that she is powerful, holy and humbled. He was humbled by death and loss, too, like a lot of us in the room are. His best friend in his life was his brother John. One of their excursions together was sailing up and down the Concord and Merrimack rivers in a canoe. They used the sail in the day and took it off and camped under it as a tent in the evening. They ate wild berries and they hunted and fished. They told each other that they loved one another out loud, which was not a common encounter for men of their era and age. They taught school together for years, and they were best friends until one day John cut himself shaving, got tetanus, and died being held in Henry's arms. He talked in that reading that Beth read today about what it would mean to not think that death and illness are personal affronts. To not believe that our own laying ourselves into the ground is somehow abhorrent to nature. To take it personally. But rather to give up our own lives at the end as gently as the leaves fall from the tree and become the soil. He ended up doing this pretty well. The people in his life, when he died of tuberculosis in his mid-40s, said that he was one of the most gentle, dying people anyone had ever seen. He wrote what he needed to write. He said what he needed to say. His aunt came to him and asked, "Have you made your peace with God?" And he said, "I don't think we ever fought." The last full sentence that he said before he died was, "Now comes good sailing." Now comes good sailing. Maybe to see his brother again. It is possible to be holy and speak with conviction, and be deeply humbled at the same time. Look at the God of nature, who does not ask you to disappear to be useful. The God of nature that needs every leaf and tree and insect and stinging thing to be exactly as it is in the family of all things. And then will ask you to lay yourself back down into the dust once again. The God of nature who says, I need you just exactly as you are, and one day I won't need you anymore. Both. The God of the Christian and Jewish scriptures that takes people like Moses, an orphan who leads a slave rebellion, a man who says, I cannot speak, I stutter, please use someone else, a man who murdered somebody before God found him. A God who says, nope, I need you, just like that, but please get to work. A God in the scriptures who would use someone like the character Mary, an unwed teenage mother of color in occupied territory, living in poverty, who gives birth to someone who said represented God's grace in the world. In the scriptures, the stories never say that God says, I wish you had more money before you can do this, or I wish you were older, I wish you were married. That God just says, I need you. Don't disappear. But I also have a job that you may not want. You may not be totally in control. How we respond to people that disagree with us or realities we can't change, the storms, the being trapped on an airplane, the reality that one day we will all leave this earth, will dictate where we find life's happiness and grace and God. Whether we try to dominate other people to find our control or whether we disappear, neither will help us find God. The spiritual life asks that you show up exactly as you are, and you are used in the family of all things, and you speak with conviction about things that matter, and with grace you lay yourself down. Do you have something that would help you speak with conviction? Is there a force that you would cooperate with that's so important that you would stand up and speak with authority and say, this must happen? Not the kind of force that would make you disregard others' humanity, not the kind of force that would make you humiliate someone else, but the kind of force that calls you like a really good secret that you think everybody should know. Do you have things that proactively humble you? Not humiliate you, but humble you. Because I found that if I don't proactively humble myself, the world will do it for me. Over and over again. It's way better when I do it for myself. For me, placing ourselves in the midst of real difference, I mean real difference, or death, or illness, or the storm, things I cannot change or take away, putting myself in the presence of those not only raises the stakes of life, it also softens the edges. Because let me tell you, if you are going to die, and you are, if your life will one day end, and it will, and if there's nothing you can do about it, and you can't, then you had better get to loving life right now. You had better get to finding the source of joy and calling and compassion and peace and answer where your purpose and life's vision leads right now, because one day this will be over. And the stakes are incredibly high. And if everyone you've ever met will also get sick and die and is afraid and is worried about their body and whether people love them and whether they're good at their job or a million other things, if everyone else you've ever met is finite and fragile, then that means grace is necessary to the nth degree. It says that everyone you've ever known has been held sick in the arms of someone who loved them. It means everyone you've ever despised has been an infant child. It means everyone you love and everything you've ever seen will one day, like the leaves, drop back down into the dust, and grace will help. Practice surrounding yourself with people that do not ask you to dominate or coerce others before they're worthy of love. Practice being in places that remind you that you are holy and humbled all at the same time. Beautiful and very small. Like graveyards and forests and airplanes where you're trapped with other humans, even if you don't want to be. Intentionally place yourself in communities and environments where you are reminded that you are good and not the center of the universe. Because you can be holy and humbled all at the same time. You can find things that are worthy of fighting for. You can stand up for causes of justice. You can speak with conviction and do it in a way that does not disparage other human beings. You can love yourself and know that the sun does not set on you alone. You can love others and hold on to them fiercely, hoping that they will never die, knowing that one day you will have to give them up, all things. And you can live with passion and conviction and authority and purpose and mission, and when it's over, let yourself fall down into the dust like the leaves and say before you go, now comes good sailing. All of it is possible together. Amen.